Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another episode of the 50 Most Relevant. Today we're talking about Dustin Martin. He is a really interesting player that I found it really hard to place through this 50, but we had to put him in there because there is a world where Dustin Martin could be one of the best forward selections for you in 2022. Is that a bit extreme and a bit of hyperbole? We'll get to that in a moment. We had him on the episode just yesterday. We had to bring him back. I've got Kane. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hello, MJ. Would this be Dustin Martin's maybe 10th plus appearance on this list?
I think so.
If Coaches Panel went back that far, and frankly, I don't know if it did, you'll have to inform me, but you look at his career, and from his second year, he was fantasy relevant.
Yeah.
He was fantasy relevant. You know, had that, pretty much always had that forward status, was always peppering the top 10 forwards at a minimum. We know what his big years were like, especially in SuperCoach. He was throw away the key, wasn't he, with that durability that he had for the bulk of his career. So it's crazy now that we look at him as a guy that's, you know, you'd say in the twilight of his career, especially in his fantasy career. And yet he's still good enough to make a list like this. You know, we did Christian Petrarca yesterday.
Just yesterday.
That won last year's Norm Smith. Today we're doing a guy that's got 3.
Yeah.
And to be fair, they've been juxtaposed a lot, those two players.
They have been.
I think that's the thing that's so impressive about Dusty, isn't it, MJ? When you've got pretty much outside of last year, this guy had only missed a maximum of 2 games in a season. He's given you 20 plus games in every season. And we know that 2020, there was only 17. He gave you 16. So you're talking about a fantasy guy, all the things that we look for and we attribute to good players in fantasy. It's what Dusty's had, isn't it? He's had the durability. He's got a ceiling. He's consistent. And the thing we love the most, and we know how important the role is, he's the best player in his team. So he's always got that primary role. He always draws the football.
Yes.
In 2022, it is a different Dustin Martin. It is a different Richmond.
Very much so.
Accustomed to the past 5 years. I think that's what's really interesting because for the first time, MJ, we probably have what you'd say real value. He's in a price range now where he's competing with a lot of guys that in the past you wouldn't think of him in this low 80s in a DT bracket.
No.
And low 90s in SuperCoach. You know, he's always been a guy that you sort of think maybe there's a bit of 5 points either side. You know, he's got some bit of fluctuation, but he's always in that top, 5 or 6 priced forwards.
Almost every year,
This price range, you look at who you're comparing him to. It's at that real awkward stage because you've got the up-and-comers. Are they going to be able to jump him?
Yep.
Or is he just going to return to, obviously not that 2017 level, but maybe more that 2018, 19, 20 level that had him as a low 90s. And a low ton in SuperCoach. So where do we start, MJ? Do we start with the injuries last year? Do we start with his time in hospital and that injury? Where do we start?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to remind ourselves of exactly what we are dealing with, even in what was probably a frustrating season for Richmond last year. He started like a house on fire last year. He scored a 131 and 100 in Dream Team and Fantasy in the first 2 games of the year. And in SuperCoach, even better, 158 and 120. And if you're a Patrick Dangerfield owner at that point in time, you might have remembered he was suspended for a couple of games after round 1. You saw that round 1 score and you went, decision made for me. Danger out, Dusty in. You get 1 week into it, you think, this is awesome. This has gone fantastically for me. But for the rest of the year, probably didn't go quite as well as you'd expected. But in totality across the season, he did average 81 in Dream Team and Fantasy, 4 tons, 5 additional scores, 80 plus, while in SuperCoach, 5 tons, 3 scores over 120, 7 more over 80 in that format in the game, and an average of 93. From a value perspective of where he's priced at, it is the lowest he's been pretty much since his debut year. in terms of what you're paying for him. Yes, at the start of 2011, you would have paid for him at a cheaper point, but he averaged 89 in DreamTeam in fantasy in year 2 and 98 in SuperCoach. So really, since that early era of Dustin Martin, he's not being priced at this basement level. So it's good news for those that believe this narrative, that Dustin Martin is a proud footballer, that the Richmond Football Club are a proud club, and they are all incredibly hurt from what they put out on the park last year. We remember back to that famous Jack Rewalt moment in AFL 360 that now is in part being used in jest back towards him and the club, but where they believed so convincingly as a club over that final 8, 9, 10 weeks of the year, quote unquote, good luck if you play against us, because the belief was still there. The hunger was still there, albeit in an articulated and a belief within the mind. And so for people looking at Dustin Martin and looking at the forwards we have this year, they just see a guy that is screaming value towards us, because we run through his averages across since 2013 in DreamTeam and fantasy: 97, 97, 103, 107, the probably never to be repeated again, 113, 92, 97, 93 adjusted average with the shortened quarters of 2020. SuperCoach, 102, 99, 105, 108, 119, 104, and then a couple of pretty much 100 seasons there if you want to move a few point unders of a decimal. And so, Kane, we do have this guy that feels like Mr. 100 for our forwards in SuperCoach, Mr. 90 to 95 in Dream Team. And we look at the forward line and go, okay, Duncan feels if he's fit, he's 100. Taranto, if he's fit, could be anything from 100 and 110, depending on the format you play. While Dunkley could be anything from a 90 right through to the number one scoring player in fantasy, in SuperCoach as well, if the parallels all line up for him. But then the question marks do start to appear for us in that forward line, don't they? We feel like there's this defined top three, and then the next 15 to 20, anything could happen. But Dusty, you could build a case, maybe just one of the safest top tier forwards after that elite crew disappear for us.
Yeah, that's where I think MJ 2021 is important. And like you said, explaining why his ownership, it was already popular to start the 2021
Correct.
season. But when you had that injury to a Dangerfield and that move became so obvious and so clear to so many coaches last year, these low scores are in their mind. These disappointments are in their mind. And it is crazy to think that all those disappointments still resulted in a low 80 and a low 90 average across the two formats. And those are injury-impacted scores
in a couple of games, yeah.
And what's interesting about that is, he's the 12th priced forward in AFL fantasy. You mentioned Taranto, you mentioned Duncan. After that, you get to Jed Anderson. We know that there's a situation with Jed right now that he may or may not play in 2022.
Sure.
You get to Josh Dunkley. I've made that take multiple times, that this guy has the scoring build. The sky is the limit, but there is clear role issues.
Yes.
And again, he has had, albeit various injuries, not soft tissue, but he had that shoulder last year. He's had some syndesmosis in the past.
Yeah.
Again,
cumulative, it's not great.
He averaged 92. We know that the front half was amazing post-injury. It's really hard for any player to deliver good scores. He didn't get that role. Then you get to Sidebottom. Sidebottom was a guy that we thought, he's just going to bounce back. He only went at 88. Chad Wingard, 88. Trelaw, 87. Green, who we know is suspended,
missing
85.
for a while. Yeah.
Now we start getting to Jaden Stevenson, DeGoey, Canelio's priced just ahead of Dusty. And then these ones below me really fascinate me.
This is for AFL fantasy too, by the way.
Oh,
SuperCoach is different, but yeah.
Yeah, of course. But Tyron Thomas, Jake Stringer, Tim English, Ben McAvoy, Lockie Weller, Sean Higgins. And then we get to Jack Brown, Will Snelling, and Shai Bolton. This is the guys, Dusty's 12th. That was the next 6 players, MJ. Think about that in a sense. And by the time I got to Sean Higgins, he averaged 79. So you're telling me Dustin Martin, 81 with 2 injury-impacted
games.
He's already pushing on the precipice of that top 6 just to get back to a low 90.
Yeah.
do you have any confidence in Sidebottom or Wingard
Nope.
or Treloar's role in their team?
Nope.
Do we know what's going on with where Stevenson, De Goey, Camilio are going to line up?
Oh,
Do we have
some
any
of them might
confidence
not
in
even be in the
Stringer?
AFL. Yeah.
Well, that's why I think you start getting confident when you look at Dusty.
Yeah,
You
that's
start
right.
thinking, okay, he's at 81. I think that's a clear flaw.
Yeah.
An absolute clear flaw.
Yeah. He's value for sure.
So I can get some value. I can get some value. You know, what happens, MJ, if we go to the preseason and we see, you know, Taranto lined up in the forward line again, and they say, well, Toby Green's missing the start of the season. We want to see Taranto did a good job kicking some goals late in the season.
Yep.
We're going to play him. Now all of a sudden, this path for Dusty to return to top 6 and give you 10 points of value, and
It's
that's
very
value,
easy.
and that's value where, you know, you are a hold for the season because you know
Sure.
he is durable outside of that really heavy knock he took that really put him into hospital for the remainder of the season. He's going to be there each week. He's
Yep.
going to be Richmond's best player.
Yep.
He's a kicking player, so you want the ball in his hands.
Correct.
So in terms of him challenging that cluster below him, I feel really good. Where I think people will look for even more value is lower down. You know,
Yes.
the guys that, again, we touched on Jack Graham there. If there's a clear midfield shift that he wants to take over and run that midfield,
Yeah.
it's very hard for me to see him with the way he plays his game not being a 90 guy.
No,
Then you
there's a
get
few
the guy-
Jack Steele-isms about him, isn't he? Where if he gets that
He's not the
ball
best
winning,
tackles. Well, we've
Cool.
said it too. Is like he's shown us high ceiling in ball winning. He's
yes,
shown us high ceiling in marks and
in
goals
tackles.
tackles.
just not
Now,
together.
we always say once they come together, now you get a real fantasy gun.
That's
You've
right.
got that build. Then we hit the Zach Butters, the Isaac Heaney's of the world. You know, there's a bit of buzz around a Zach Bailey.
Yeah.
You know, if there's an injury to Tom Hickey, Peter Adams, I promise you, will be in a lot of teams.
Yeah,
He's shown
sure.
that he can score. So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing in the forward line where people might go, yeah, but I can go even cheaper than Dusty. You know, you're getting 100 extra K to go to Connor Rosie, to
Yeah.
go to, you know, these type of guys that are even cheaper.
Yeah. And in Dream Team and Supercoach, Cornelio, who's down at considerably even further bargain territories. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I think it's, again, similar to, you know, when we chatted about Jaden Short the other day, MJ, is that
Yeah, it's a good call.
when you feel like there's real top-heavy guys, and I think those top-heavy three are Taranto, Duncan, and Dunkley.
Yeah, I think
When
that's
you've
fair.
got the heavy three, you start getting your Greshams. You think you've got, you know, you probably want to play Hollands on the field just due to his price.
Yeah,
Maybe
value.
you like some of the other guys that are a bit cheaper.
Yeah.
I think structurally, not many teams will have a need for a guy in Dustin's price range that maybe only presents 10 points of value.
Yep.
Yeah. And again, the other thing we've got to note with Dustin is he is a bit more volatile than he was previously in his scoring. You know,
And
there is
especially
some-
in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy more so than Supercoach. That's been the format that gradually over time, because he's not awarded a points boost for the impactful moments that he takes place in a game, because it's just the pure raw data of what you do and there's no increase of impact on game or score involvement or rewarded for efficiency. And he does take on the damaging kick. We talked about that just yesterday with Petrarca, don't we? He gets high volume of turnovers because he takes on that game-breaking moment. Dusty does that too. But I look back through Dusty's past 2 years, and in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy, just focusing on that scoring format for a moment, he's had just 2 games, including adjusted 1.25 multiplications, just the 3 games where he's gone over 120. And so in that format of the game where you're going, yeah, he might be your 90 guy and maybe even push up to 95. I think that might be almost the ceiling of what he could do. If you've only got 3 in the past 2 seasons, you're coming off something we haven't talked about yet, an incredible injury with a lacerated kidney. The narrative of how he gives you ceiling games that hurts you for taking him on early isn't really there. You have to almost load in the mindset of, Well, he's slimmed down. He's fit. He was in the midfield a lot last year, to be fair. No more or less than the past few years. I still don't think the need for him to be heavy forward or heavy mid is there anymore. With Rewalt there, with Bolton around, with Lynch around, I don't think you can build that narrative as much through there unless you think that Richmond midfield sucks and he has to hold it together. I don't see the ceiling there.
You need those tackles to really come up, though, wouldn't you? Because again, I know there's some injury games, so the stats get a bit
murky. Yes,
they get a bit messed up. But if we just look at straight, the actual columns, his height, he only had 5 tackles once in a game last year.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of games where there's just 1 or nothing.
Yeah.
Then you go to the marks. He had 7 tackles in the first 2 games of the season. And then after that, the high was 4. And there was multiple 0 or 1. So the thing that's hard for him now is he's not a stat stuffer like some of these other guys.
No, he's not. It's not like 2017. No,
but like the thing is, he's handy. He does have goals helping him, and
he does.
But Richmond's not a team that, unless there's a clear change in game plan, he doesn't get those
easy.
You think about a Mitch Duncan, MJ, when you watched Duncan last year. How many times does he do that little hook lead and gets hit up on like a 15-meter pass into the corridor, and then he can use his kicky?
Yes.
And he just gets these +6s easily, and he just finds little pockets of space. Dusty could absolutely do that, and he'd be a great weapon, but it's not the way
Richmond's,
the Tigers move the ball.
No.
As I said, they're forward handball, they're running
surge.
And the thing as well is, it's not that easy to change that, because you built your team through the draft, through free agency, through trade, to target those type of players. Like, there's a reason they have the Edwards, the Boltons,
Lamberts,
these hard running, quick, Rioli, skillful. It's not just easy to go into a kick mark game. That's not really how they play. So again, I think there's value in Dusty.
There is, absolutely.
I don't know if it's enough. As I said, because that's the thing. You're not just weighing Dusty against forwards. When you're building the starting squad, if there's a backman that you like that's about priced at 75 or so, 70, and you think, they can probably get to 90, well, you have to take them over.
He's in the range of
value.
He's in the range of like an Elliot Yeo. Just the other day, we did it with Jordox on the podcast. We talked about Caleb Sarong, who's right in that low 80s range.
What he's competing with. Now, we always know when you're in the forward line, in particular,
you add the 10 points.
Well, the bar is lower, isn't it? Well, the bar's lower. He doesn't have to get, if he gets to 90.
That's a top 10, let's be honest. Yeah.
And as you mentioned on the Sarong podcast, when you think about, the top 20 is 105 guys in the mids.
Yeah.
Especially if we're just focusing on a DT tangent. So I think where the appeal for Dusty is when you're going shopping in around 8 onwards.
Yep.
You can hit him at a trough.
Yes. Could you? Yeah.
Stinkers. And he can be that great guy that you just put in your team, ends up being your F5, F6. You've got your big boys that you're really confident in. And again, when you're weighing that up, maybe you're getting him at a cheaper price. Maybe you've seen how the team's going to go, because he is going to get attention. When you're playing Richmond,
it's all him.
You've got a game plan for him in the middle.
Yep.
You've got a game plan for when he goes forward.
Yes.
He doesn't just sneak on, not that he ever snuck under the radar, but you've got seasons and seasons now of people knowing how they want to handle Dustin Martin. If he rolls forward from this stoppage, who's picking him up? Like, that's really ingrained now. So he's going to have those games where there's going to be a flaw.
Yes.
Sometimes Richard's not winning the ball. Sometimes he has to sit forward. The ball doesn't come in.
Sure.
He does have that volatility. He's not just going to go to the back pocket kick chasing.
Yes.
He doesn't structure up that way. And the way they use him, he wants to be fresh to have that impact. It's okay for them if he's sitting in the forward line fresh, has the whole picture to himself. So, as I said, the game plan doesn't really show me that there's going to be a return to anything higher than a low 90s in DT and a flat 100 in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
I guess the thing that's appealing for a lot of people is I want to find the guy that's going to break out next. And that's where, a Butters in particular, I think.
Yeah, people might go Butters over him.
Yeah, if there's any CBAs in the preseason, if there's any injuries there, if there's any clarification about, Port got hammered, for example, with their lack of midfield depth. It was basically Wines, Boak, and then it was guys like, Will and Drew rolling through there. If they say that, hey, we've addressed that, Connor Rosie's fit, he's healthy, he's going to be a starting CBA midfielder, he'll rest forward. Well, you're probably not going to pick Dusty, are you? Because you're getting Cantor. You've already got more. You're paying less.
Yeah, and potential comparable size of score. Yeah.
And people like something new, MJ. Like I said, that's why it is important to know.
Yes, it is.
If you owned him last year,
yep,
you do have that taste in your mouth, and it is very hard, even if you're the most disciplined of fantasy coach, to remove that.
Well, if you traded him in post those first two scores, he gave you an 85 in SuperCoach and a 76 in DT. And so
trade him back out.
And had to trade him back out because of that injury. So those are the things. What I do notice when you look through the career of Dustin Martin, especially over the past 2 or 3, I don't think you can. 2017 feels like an outlier that you just know everything went so well for him in Richmond. Yeah.
Once it goes beyond there, it doesn't.
The game's changed so much. But if you do look at it, he's this guy that goes on runs. And if you time it right with Dusty, you can really be incredibly well rewarded for it. Just looking at his 2020 scores just for a moment. If you timed it well from, say, round 7, now remember the Dream Team and AFL fantasy scores, these are unadjusted. So these are just the pure numbers. So an 80 was 100 in those years. So if you brought him in, by the way, coming in off the back of a 38 and a 66 in SuperCoach, this is what he did. 72, 90, 100, 81, 75, 69, 105, 83 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. Now, these are just the pure numbers. These are not adjusted at all, but the vast majority of them are right in that 90 to 115 range. Just elite strong scoring in SuperCoach. 100, 108, 184. 111, 74, 92, 147, and 97. So I think for me, the key with Dustin is around timing, because I don't think outside of that uber big 3, there's a crystallized next group of forwards. And so is his 90s good enough, or 100 in SuperCoach, which is certainly, I think, the ceiling of what he could be, unless something is drastically changing in that Richmond lineup and style. Is his enough? Just good enough? And if you can time it right with an upgrade, or you get those big scores to start the year and bank those points, you're away. So that's why for me, Dusty's still such a relevant guy, because there's the ability to go on a run for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks where he puts on 100 to 105 in Dream Team and Fantasy, where he puts on a 110, 115, 120 in SuperCoach. And everyone then goes, oh, that's right, he's a phenomenal player, I'll jump on. But every week that those happen, those good scores, you're just missing and you're paying for points that you've already lost. So that's why for me, Dusty has to be in consideration, because there is value at the starting point. We see statistically, he goes on runs. And if you time it right, both with him or anyone, I suppose, in fantasy footy, if you get the timing right, you're laughing all the way to the bank.
Yeah. The reason he's more timing relevant than most, MJ, is because there is a range. There is. Whether it's tagged or just quiet games, the volatility is in his score a lot more than other players. So that's why I feel like he's the type of guy for me. If he falls in my lap, if it's round 7, I've got a cow to a level, and I'm looking around the price, and I've just say Taranto, Duncan, and Dunkley are firing, and I'm like, wow, those are the 3. Thankfully, I've got them, and I'm like, okay, who's making up that next run? And it's a bit of a blanket. That's where I think Dusty's going to get real appealing to people, is when they're looking at their first couple upgrades. Yeah. If he started it slowly, again, ideally you'd love to see it as a tag, as opposed to just poor scoring. Yeah. Because he still has that ability. And again, last year it was a 158 as a high. You mentioned the 184 in 2020.
Yeah, for SuperCoach,
there is
huge.
A ceiling game there. So it's
yes,
almost like
every year.
if you haven't seen it,
It's still to
there's
come.
there's not many left. We
No.
always say that. There's not many left. So he's not going to give you 10 of those, 10 120 pluses maybe like he used to. But if it's middle of the season, you haven't seen that game yet, he's in the team looking fine, it will come. There will be his game where he dominates because he's still that player. He's still that important to the side.
Unbelievably.
He's not just going to, be hidden in a forward pocket. He still does the pump. He's still the player.
Still elite.
He stirs the drink, doesn't he? If that Richmond team's going to do well, it's Dusty that gets things going and sends them over the edge.
Yes.
I think structurally it's going to be hard. You have to be really confident, I think, to make room for him in the starting squad because, no, you don't have the confidence of him being a top forward like those other big three. And again, when you've got guys below that are presenting more value and giving you more cash and more flexibility to do other things with your team.
That's the interesting one, isn't it?
It's an awkward price range. I think, as always with him, SuperCoach is your preferred.
Yes, agree.
I think you like him there. DT and AF, it's probably let's see what happens. Let's have a look. Hey, if the tackle count starts going up, if there's some easy marks for him.
Yeah, that game style evolves a bit, Yeah,
if it changes, then you've got to change.
Yeah.
We can only make a judgment with what we have right now. If there's dramatic changes, clearly adjust accordingly. But I think he'll be a less than 10% guy across the formats to start.
Yeah, definitely Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. I think he's going to be much more of a watch list / upgrade than others. While in SuperCoach, some might go, bullish on Duncan, and I need a bit of value at F2 or an F3. So I'll choose Dusty over Taranto. I'll choose Dusty over a Dunkley. It'll be, like you said, that combination of how people go with that starting forward structure is going to be fascinating to see and will be the alternate and ultimate dictator about whether or not he's a starter for people or an upgrade. Regardless, he's got to be on your pre-season watch list. But draft is interesting, Kane, where he goes. Like you said, outside of that freak incident last year, he's been relatively durable, cleared out of hospital, has seemingly into full training through this month of January, according to the club, which is positive signs. And none of us can really know until game day whether or not that's going to be any impact on him, but we can only presume it won't. He is not a fearful person, young Dustin. And so we're not going to ever put that onto him, that he'd be afraid of any form of physical contact or something in the contest. But he won't be a top 3 forward off the board. We've been pretty clear throughout this episode. And I think the consensus in fantasy circles is that's probably the upper 3. But then in the formats, it does start to evolve a little bit. Do you chase the ceiling and the young bloods? Do you chase the flagged midfield moves, or do you with this forward F1? Because Dusty will go as an F1. Do you just go, I'm just going to bank him? And he might not be the best forward at the value point I get him, but he's going to be someone that he won't hurt me. He probably won't win me too many games, but his deviation might be just the thing in a couple of formats that holds him. Where are you picking Dusty on draft day, man?
Yeah, it's interesting because he's probably one of those guys that you want to see what else is around. Is Tyron Thomas still on the board? What type of midfielders have he gone? When I look at, the players that, he's in the low 80s, MJ, again, I've probably got him as an 85 at the low. Yeah. Maybe up to a low 90 in DT. So you're looking with that adjusted average or value, he's probably competing with 95 to 100 mids. You look at those mids, would you take him over a Brad Crouch? Would you take him over, a Boak? Would you take him over, a Seedsman? These type of guys are all going to be, Brandon Ellis. I think obviously nine times out of 10 people would take him, the name, the position.
The possibilities, Yeah,
I think he's probably in that late 5th, early 6th type of range.
Yeah.
I think you still have to be I think some people will go earlier, but I think you still have to be really cognizant of, depending how many people you're playing. If you're playing, 7 mids, 5 backs, 5 forwards, 1 ruck, you do have to be really careful with how quickly the mids do fall away.
Yes, they do.
Especially, people have some leanings towards ruckman as well. So I think, if you're in the 5th round, it's in the sort of 40s, late maybe mid 50s, I think that's where he's going to start going, because the forward line just isn't really great when it gets. I mentioned some of those guys below. How do you really have any confidence?
Yeah,
at
you
the
can't.
moment in the stringer? It's amazing, MJ. A lot of those guys, Thomas, Goey, Stringer, first half split to second half split,
Hugely different. Yeah, which one are you buying for at that point?
Some of them, the differentials close to 35 points.
Yeah, it's massive.
Between, 65 the first half, 100 the back end.
Yeah, some of them are unrosterable. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I think we've seen over time, taking the mid, the safe mid that has the good role, because there's so much volatility in these forwards that you can pay for this, what you think's an 85 guy, and get a 60. Yeah. That doesn't happen in the midfield. You don't go from a 90 guy unless there's dramatic injury. So for me, if he's in the late fives, that's probably where I feel, because I just don't think I'm going to get burnt with upside. Whereas there are people who go, I can get Alex Witherden in the back line. I think he's going to take the kickouts. I think he's going to push 100. So you don't have that sort of upside in my mind with those type of guys. So for me, that's where I'd have him. Where would you be drafting Dustin?
Yeah, I think he goes definitely as an F1 for someone on draft day without any questions. But the question I have for me is, how big is the gap between the Uber 3 forwards and next? And is it so, because those guys will go in the late first to second round, those 3 guys.
Yes.
So the question for me is, at what point, is it the 3rd round? Is it the 4th round? At what point do people just go, I don't have a big forward and I feel the name value of Dusty surpasses and I'll reach for him potentially a round or 2 earlier than I should. If people see these big 3 forwards run off the board super quickly, is it the old school ruck run kind of theory of, I haven't got an F1 yet, I better lock it away? Because as much as coaches don't want to admit it, every single coach on draft day does have that nagging moment where they see a couple of a position outside of the midfield disappear and go, okay, it's getting a little scarce as those 3 or 4 guys go. So that for me is it. I'd be comfortable going for him in the 4th round a little earlier if I felt the mids that I was really bullish on were gone. But that's the variable of draft day, isn't it? You've got in some leagues where they're heavy mids, others just like, no, I'm locking away ruck. Everyone drafts with a different mindset and strategy. So, but you're right, he's a top 50 pick for sure.
Balance. Some people don't like looking at their team and going, I've taken 3 mids, I need a forward or a back or a ruck here, because I don't like how it looks.
Yeah.
I think we're more of the belief of, at the end of the day, you want the most points on field. So back whatever.
And where does it come?
Is value. And again, in my experience, the amount of backs and forwards that pop up over the waivers in the first month of the season is crazy.
Yeah.
You might get 1 mid that pops up on the waivers. So
yeah, the seedsman type.
We use that rough guide. If you're drafting 100 mid, it's comparable to a 90 back and 90 forward, because when you look at the numbers of the season, that's what it spits out.
It's in that range.
Says, mid's a dime a dozen. He's only a 90 guy. But when you're playing 7 mids in a 10-team league,
gets nasty down there.
It gets to 70 guys, MJ.
Very quickly.
And often those 70 guys aren't even in their team.
Yeah, job security is poor.
They're the guys that you feel. But again, I don't think I'd be getting him
where you've got him. Yeah, I think that's right.
I wouldn't be picking him. He won't be on the board. I think he's gone by the late 3rd in a 10-team league. I think he's at 25 to 35 for most leagues. He will get drafted in that range. For what you said, those big 3 forwards are probably gone in the first 15 picks.
15, 20 picks for sure. Yeah.
That's a lot of forward points gone
already.
People won't feel confident. A lot of people won't feel confident with a Trelaw. They won't feel confident with a Wingard.
No.
Again, they might. But again, I don't see him getting to the 45 range, which is where I probably feel most confident.
Yep.
But maybe I'm more bullish on some other backs and some other mids that I think can get close. But yeah, you'd feel pretty good at that point, because, as I said, I don't think the burn's that much. I think the burn's an 80.
And that's in DTM fantasy, and 85 in SuperCoach. That's the burn, and that's not a draft breaker. In the forward line,
he's not a. You're not swinging for the fences.
No,
with Dustin.
No, it's a base hit. He feels safe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like Butters, he could be. He could change.
Either way.
Those guys. But again, we've seen that they haven't actually delivered for extended periods. So,
yeah, which he has.
You know, that's the thing that do you want to, that's where it comes to each individual. What do you look at? Do you like Dusty because I don't want to take a risk in the forward line. I want plug and play.
Yep.
Or do you go, you know what? I'd rather come last, but I'm going to go for upside on everything. I want this upside. I want this upside.
Yeah,
I don't care about the injury risk.
No.
So that's why draft is always so fascinating. But I think if you get Dusty, you'll be pretty pleased with what he can.
Yeah, you feel pretty safe and you can definitely build your squad around him. All right. That's our thoughts on Dustin Martin throughout this episode. Hey, mate, appreciate your work as always.
Pleasure, MJ. Thank you.
If you want to go and check out the article, it is online for you at coachespanel.tv, as well as all the other players revealed so far as we're now venturing in to the early 30s of the 50 most relevant. If you're loving the countdown, there are really 3 key ways to support the Coaches Panel in 2022. If you're loving the podcast, leave a 5-star rating and review. Follow us on wherever you're getting these podcasts or across social media. The second is tell a friend that plays fantasy footy about the Coaches Panel. Let them know about the great content you've been enjoying this preseason. Or third, you can become a financial supporter, joining the Patreon army and getting access to a bunch of exclusive content, hidden rewards, and some early access to a bunch of different stuff. All the links for that are at coachespanel.tv. Tomorrow, we hit the number 33, and 2 players that we loved owning last year was Callum Mills and Rory Laird. Why? Because they were available in a line, but played as midfielders. Tomorrow's player is available in a line outside of the midfield, but many believe he's a lock to be one of the midfielders that booms for his club and could just be the top of his line, just like Mills and Laird were for us last year. Who is it? Is it a defender? Is it a forward? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.